Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Progress with number 65 in the series Viewers Games. This one is from Ralph from the USA. Hey Rick, I love your Chess to Progress channel. I especially love the endgames and viewers games you post. I can always learn something from them. I was wondering, could you please analyze this game I played? I felt like I should have lost against the best play. So can you help me figure out where each side went wrong? If you can feature this game, that would totally make my day. Thanks. And that was a nice email from Ralph. And Ralph is white in this game. This game was played on chess.com with a 5-minute time control plus a 3-second increment per move. Ralph had a rating of 1297 at the time this game was played. And his opponent was Mr. Viking. And that opponent had a rating of 1246. Ralph opened d4 and d6 from his opponent. c4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, e4, bishop g7, and Ralph plays f4. The 4 pawns attack against the King's Indian. These 4 pawns look very strong, but there's also a downside to it. Sometimes those pawns are like a giant, but on not a very steady feet, as they call it. Black castled, knight f3 from Ralph, and here the main move, which has been played thousands of times before, is c5. I'll give you a few more moves of the main variation, the main line. White then plays d5, e6 is the main move, bishop e2, and then black takes in the center and white usually takes back with the c-pawn. But in this game Mr. Viking did not play c5, he played knight c6. Ralph immediately kicked that knight, knight went to b4, and Ralph kicked the knight again. Knight a6 only move, and here comes a very instructive mistake from Ralph. He plays b4, and that is dangerous with the bishop shining through to the rook on a1, because now black has a little combination. He found it, he played knight takes e4. It looks like he gives away a piece, because that knight is unprotected on e4. Ralph took it, but that opens up that diagonal, and the rook is also unprotected. So black wins material here. Bishop takes a1, picks up a full rook. Bishop e3 attacks that bishop on a1, and Mr. Viking goes back to g7. Black is just an exchange and a pawn up. But Ralph does not give up. He plays c5. And here the best move according to the engine is to take on c5, b takes, and then c6. To avoid what's happening in the game. As we'll see, white gets some counterplay now. Because after c5, black decided not to take on c5, he played bishop g4, developing the bishop. Makes sense. But here, Ralph could have played the move c5, c6, and that is an annoying move, because you cannot take that pawn, because then your knight will be hanging. If you take on c6, the knight on a6 is unprotected. It would not have saved Ralph, but c6 here is an annoying move. Instead, Ralph decided to kick the bishop with h3, and Mr. Viking took on f3. In general, it's a good idea to swap pieces when you're ahead in material. The queen takes back, but now black plays a bad move. He plays f5, and suddenly white has compensation. And why? Because of this gaping hole on e6, and this knight can jump into that hole. And Ralph saw it. Knight g5 on its way to e6, and black no longer has his light squared bishop to take that knight on e6. Remember, he swapped his bishop for a knight on f3 only a few moves ago. Now here knight e6 is a strong threat, because it would fork queen and rook, and maybe that's why Mr. Viking now played rook f7, so that knight e6 is no longer a fork, but of course he puts his rook en prise on f7. And Ralph could have taken, king takes, and then a move like bishop c4, and white is slightly better here. He has his material back and has a slightly better position. White is still a pawn down, but he has two bishops. This knight doesn't make a very good impression, and this bishop looks very nice, but it's just hitting air. White is slightly better here, despite being a pawn down. But after rook f7, Ralph took a very brave decision. He did not take the rook, he played knight e6, and that of course is a very, very strong piece. An octopus, it's sometimes called. So instead of taking the material, Ralph plays his knight to such a strong square. Very brave. Most people would have gladly taken the material back after having blundered that rook on a1. Okay, white is hitting the queen, so black has to play his queen, and the queen should have gone to c8. But Mr. Viking made a mistake. He played the queen to e8, and that invites a little combination from white. And Ralph saw it. He took on a6, and that's removing the defender of the c7 pawn. B takes a6, and now knight takes c7, and we have another fork. Those knights are tricky pieces. Black has to save his queen, queen c8, and now knight takes a8, makes sense, queen takes a8, and for example castling, and here white again has a much better position. But for the second time, Ralph plays a very brave move. Instead of taking on a8, he goes back with his knight to e6, to that beautiful square. Not many players, as I said, would have dared to do this, and I must commend Ralph for this move. It's not the best move in the position, but it shows that Ralph understands that sometimes material is not as important as piece activity, and that knight on e6 is indeed probably worth a rook. Bishop c3 check came to take white's castling rights away. King f2, it's not a big problem. The king can go to f2, is relatively safe there, can later go to g1 or h2, and this rook is free to come into the game. a5 from Mr. Viking, rook b1 from Ralph, black took on b4, a takes b4, and rook b8, hitting the pawn on b4 now with two pieces, and it's only defended once. Ralph went forward, c6 with his passed pawn. That's now a very nice passed pawn supported by that beautiful knight. Black could have taken on b4, rook takes, bishop takes, and then, for example, bishop d4, and white is slightly better. But after c6, Mr. Viking did not take that pawn on b4, he played queen a6. And Ralph knows the saying, passed pawns must be pushed, so he pushed that pawn to c7. Rook c8 had to be played, and now, unfortunately, Ralph made a big mistake. Queen e2 is the best move here, with a better position for white. But he played the unfortunate move b5. And that allows a queen fork. Do you see it? Black saw it, Mr. Viking saw it, and played queen a2 check. It's check and hitting the rook at the same time, winning that piece. For the second time in the game, black wins a rook. King g3 was played, and queen takes b1. And here Ralph commented, after losing my rook in the fork, I wanted to resign, but I realized that I still had a chance because of my passed pawns. Yes, indeed. Even though black is completely winning, Ralph soldiers on. And it's true, a game was never saved by resigning. He took on a7, and now these pawns look really strong. That not only takes a pawn, it's also attacking the bishop. And that's why black does not have time to take that pawn on b5. His bishop is hanging. But he could have played bishop e1 check as an intermediate move. The king has to play and then take on b5. And now this pawn is not as strong as white would want it to be. Here black is easily winning with his extra material. But after bishop takes a7, black did not play bishop e1 check. He played queen e1 check. The king went to h2, and now he played rook f6, intending to take that very strong knight on e6, as we'll see later. The best move had been rook f8 to give back the material that way and bring his rook into the game. That rook on f7 was not doing anything. But rook f6 was played. There comes Ralph's second passed pawn, b6. And now you really have to play rook ff8, which is the only move to not lose the game. But Mr. Viking decided to give back the exchange here. Rook takes e6. The idea is not bad, but it's too slow, because Ralph is not taking the rook, he's not taking back, he's just pushing the pawn. 2 pawns on the 7th rank, lethal. Here Mr. Viking panicked, he played rook e3, did not see what else to do, there was no saving move anyway. That rook is just en prise on e3. But Ralph took on c8 first, queening the pawn with check, king g7, and now he took the rook. Bishop f6 was still played by black, who's totally lost. Queen e8, bishop h4, there's no threat against white's king, but white will have a third queen, c8 queen, and 3 queens is too much for black, and here Mr. Viking resigned. Very good game from Ralph. For somebody with a rating of 1297 in a 5-minute blitz game, this was really impressive. After blundering the exchange in the opening with b4, falling for that knight takes e4 tactic, Ralph played really strongly, and I am really impressed by him not taking the exchange back at several occasions, but keeping that very strong knight on e6. And in the end, it was black who sacrificed his rook for that knight, so it proved that Ralph's strategy was right. Also, the final position with 3 white queens on the board is really nice. Thank you very much, Ralph, for sending me this game so I could share it with the Chess to Progress viewers. And well played. Really impressive game from you. I hope you enjoyed Ralph's game, and if you did, please give the video a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the Chess to Progress channel. Please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply. You also may want to check out my Chess to Impress channel. The link is in the description box. This is Rick for Chess to Progress. Thank you for watching.